This morning we're going to talk about coincidences. Have you experienced a coincidence in your life? Something just kind of random that you weren't expecting. Something that it could have been, God working behind the scenes if you believed in that sort of thing, but maybe not necessarily that's what it was. So we're going to be in the book of Esther and talking about that. It's really kind of an interesting story because we're talking about Babylon. This is a people that don't have any kind of connection with the one true God. And we're introduced to a king named Ahasuerus. Can you say Ahasuerus? Ahasuerus. That's a fun one to say. Depending on the translation that you're using, they will sometimes call him Xerxes. Can you say Xerxes? That's a little bit easier to say. But so whether you call him Ahasuerus or whether you call him Xerxes, it's the same king. So we meet this young lady who is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles away from her homeland, whose family has been taken and conquered by another nation, whose parents are dead. If there's anybody in the whole wide world who has a reason to be bitter and bitter towards God, I can understand it being her. If there's anybody who has ever felt forsaken by God, I can see Esther being that person. But what's astounding about this young lady is that she works really, really hard and gains the favor of the people who are over her. Instead of being bitter, instead of being angry about this, she works. It's an active thing. She earned their favor. And it's even more uncomfortable when she does really well. And the king likes her more than any other woman. And he names her the queen instead of Vashti. Well, as Mordecai's sitting around and hanging out with the king's servants, he overhears these two guys that are saying, hey, look, we're really, really upset. You know how, you've probably never talked or overheard two men who were upset about something, right? And so he listens in and they're like, yep, we're gonna lay hands on the king. We're gonna assassinate him, we're gonna kill him. And he tells Esther, and Esther tells the king that Mordecai overheard this, and they've investigate and find out that it's true. And so Mordecai saves the king's life. Esther wasn't the only one who won favor with the king, because we read in chapter 3 that there was a man named Haman in the 12th year of his reign, so 5 years later, who was also winning the favor of the king. He was advanced to the king's second in command, and he's really following his mentor. He thinks he's really great stuff. Day after day, Haman walks through, and these guys bow down to him, they show him honor, and Mordecai doesn't. So finally, he realizes, he lands on the 12th month and the 13th day. It probably was a Friday. And he says, look, king, there's these people in your nation. In this whole broad land that you own, there's this group of people that were taken and deported, and they're not really significant, but they don't really obey your laws, and it's not in your best interest to keep them around. So I'm going to pay 100,000 talents of silver, tons and tons, literal tons, like 34 tons of silver into the king's treasury, so that we can just have people annihilate them on one day of the year. Well, when Mordecai hears about this, he's understandably alarmed. He's upset. He tears his clothes. He puts on sackcloth, which is just an itchy fabric to show how upset he is. This is an outward demonstration of how upset he is. He puts on sackcloth and he puts ashes on his head and he weeps. And he goes around publicly and he goes up to the palace. No one who is that upset is allowed to actually go in to the palace. Probably some wisdom in that rule. But he goes up to the gate of the palace and he's lamenting and weeping and mourning, and he's very upset. And so everybody says, hey Esther, your cousin, he's a little freaked out right now. So she sends a messenger to him. His name is Hathach, and says, hey, what's up? Haman says, look, this is what happened. Haman has figured out a way to convince the king to let everybody kill us and take all of our stuff on one day of the year. Here, I will give you a copy of the edict, a copy of the decree, a copy of the letter. Go and beg the king to fix this. Esther sends a reply. Everybody knows that I can't go in. Nobody can go into the king unless he asks for them to come. You don't ring his doorbell without having called first. And usually it's not you calling, it's him calling you. And if he didn't call you and you show up and he didn't want to see you, you're dead. So he sends a reply. Esther, if you don't do something, there's going to be relief for the Jews from somewhere. God will provide a relief for his people in some way. Do you think that you're going to escape this annihilation? If you don't do something, you will surely be destroyed, you and your father's house. But God will provide relief some other way. Maybe God puts you in this situation through an uncomfortable means so that when this situation arose, you would be in a place that you could address it. And this is what's interesting to me. And if I perish, I perish. I perish. This is a faith in God that knows she cannot manipulate him to do what she wants. But if you know the story, you know that he doesn't kill her. She walks in after having prayed for 3 days, and he's kind of happy to see her. He extends the golden scepter. And doesn't he understand? Everybody else gets it but this guy. And he's angry. So he calls his friends, he whines to them, he calls his wife, he whines to them. Don't you guys know what Mordecai's doing to me? This guy's a big jerk. And his wife says, well, hey, why don't you kill him tomorrow before your dinner, then you can enjoy your dinner. He says, that's a great idea. We'll kill him. I'm gonna build up a gallows, or I'm gonna build a stake. But the king couldn't sleep that night. Coincidentally. And so he calls for the book of the Chronicles of the Kings. What are all the great things that I've done in my kingdom? What are all the things that have happened that were of significance? And so he says, you guys read this to me, I can't sleep. So they do. And they get to the part where Mordecai, revealed that these two guys were going to kill the king. And he's like, hey, what did we do for that guy Mordecai? Like, well, we didn't do anything. We never did anything for him. And he's like, all right, well, who's out in the court right now? Well, Haman's walking in. He's walking in right now, coincidentally. And he says, all right, we'll call Haman. Haman, you're my second-hand man. Tell me, if I wanted to show honor to somebody, then what would I do? How could I show somebody honor that I really want to? And Haman's thinking, well, who is going to want to be honored? Or who is the king going to want to honor other than me? So he says, you know what, king? Take one of your royal robes that you have worn. That it's totally, it's like kingly. Take your kingly robe and take your kingly horse, one of the horses that you've ridden, and put this man in your robe and put him on your horse, and get one of your best officials to parade him through the streets and say, look, the king wants to honor this guy. And the king says, that's a great idea. Go do everything you've said for Mordecai. Haman's killed on that which he had prepared for Mordecai. How can you not see God in this story? But it didn't solve the big problem, because remember, when the king makes a law, it can't be undone. And so Haman is taken care of. And they actually end up giving all of Haman's possessions to Mordecai, ironically. But there's still this law in the books that one day of the year, they can go out and kill Jews. He takes Esther back into the king's presence, where she begs and pleads, please do something about this. Well, if you can't revoke the law, then make a new one, making it really, really difficult to execute the old one. And the day comes around, and the people gather, the Jews gather, the Israelites gather, and they defend themselves. And they kill the people who were trying to kill them. Well, they institute a party, a festival, a celebration called Purim. God still preserves his people even when he has forsaken them for their persistent sin. See, the nation of Israel was in Persia, taken by Babylon because they had continued to sin. Persistent, they had sinned. And they could have easily been annihilated because they had not listened to God. But God still has provided a way to preserve them. He kept the promises he made to Abraham. He used uncomfortable situations, uncomfortable circumstances, and what we might consider coincidences to preserve his people. This whole series is coming to a point next week. We're moving towards something. When we feel forsaken by God, how do we deal with that? And I don't want to reveal too much, but all of this points to Jesus. Actually, I do. I want you to know. That's where we're going. God knows that Adam experienced separation from him because of his sin. God knows that Job experienced this forsaken feeling. God knows that Saul did this. God knows what Esther went through in her life. He knows about all these things. But next week we'll see not only does he know about feeling like God has forsaken you and left you and abandoned you, he has experienced it himself in his son Jesus Christ. That's where we're going. And that is our hope. That's our hope this morning. And if God had not preserved his people through this young lady, through uncomfortable and awkward circumstances, that would have ended Jesus' heritage too.